Under the burning Arizona sun, the paralyzed daughter of a fallen Apache chief was left to die until a silent cowboy appeared from the desert's edge. What happened next changed both their lives forever. Watch this powerful Wild West story of pain, redemption, and unexpected hope. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Let's get started. Under the unforgiving blaze of the Arizona sun, the land stretched endlessly, dry, cracked, and shimmering with heat. Not a single cloud softened the sky. Not a single bird sang in the silence of despair. Beside a dried-up creek bed, where water once promised life, a young woman lay motionless. Her long black hair clung to her face, dusty and tangled. The daughter of a once feared Apache chief, she had been proud once, fierce as the mountains her people roamed. But now, paralyzed from the waist down after a brutal raid, she was nothing but a shadow of what she had been. The others had left her there, whispering prayers and apologies as they rode away. She couldn't blame them. She couldn't even cry. Her body was numb, her throat burned, and her spirit, once wild, had been silenced by pain and betrayal. Hours turned into days. The desert offered no mercy. Her cracked lips bled under the sun, and each breath came as a struggle against death's slow pull. She had stopped counting time. Only the wind spoke now, a dry, mournful sound that swept through the canyons like the voice of ghosts. At night, cold replaced the fire of the day, and she shook uncontrollably, praying for warmth that never came. She thought of her father, the chief who had taught her to be brave, and wondered if he still lived or if his bones too rested somewhere beneath the endless desert sky. When morning came again, she stared blankly into the horizon, where nothing moved but the shadows of circling buzzards. Life had abandoned her, and she had begun to accept it. Then came the sound. Faint at first, like thunder from a faraway storm. Hoofbeats. Her weak heart stumbled in her chest. She tried to lift her head, but her neck ached too much. Through the haze of heat, a dark shape appeared, a rider moving slow and steady across the canyon floor. She thought it a mirage at first, another cruel trick of the desert. But as the figure grew clearer, she saw the outline of a horse, dust trailing behind. Her breath caught. The rider wore a wide hat that shadowed his face and a long coat torn by travel. A cowboy, or maybe a ghost from the past. He dismounted slowly, his movements heavy, like a man burdened by old pain. His boots sank into the sand as he approached her, his eyes unreadable beneath the brim. He didn't speak. She couldn't. For a long, strange moment they only stared at each other, a dying girl and a silent man, both marked by something the world had taken from them. The cowboy knelt beside her and offered water from his canteen. Her trembling lips touched the metal, and the liquid burned down her throat like life itself. She coughed, tears mixing with dust. He said nothing still, only watched her drink, his gaze carrying a quiet sorrow. She wondered if he pitied her, or if he saw something in her reflection that reminded him of himself. When she tried to speak, her voice came as a whisper, lost in the wind. Why? She tried to ask, but he only lifted her gently, cradling her weightless body as if she were made of glass. The horse stirred as he placed her across the saddle, then climbed behind her. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady, strong, alive. As the horse began to move, she turned her eyes toward the fading creek where she had been left. There was nothing left there now. No footprints, no voices, only silence. The cowboy's arms steadied her, not with words, but with something unspoken. They rode westward, where the sun melted into the horizon, painting the desert in shades of fire and gold. Neither spoke a single word. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with questions, memories, and the fragile beginning of something new, something neither of them yet understood. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a cruel yet beautiful witness to their crossing. She could hear the steady rhythm of hooves striking sand, a heartbeat echoing across the land. The cowboy's scent, leather, smoke, and dust, mixed with the dry air, grounding her in the present. Every now and then he glanced down at her, as if checking she still breathed. She wanted to ask who he was, where he came from, why he had stopped for her when no one else did. But exhaustion pulled her back into darkness before the words could form. As she drifted into sleep, she heard his voice for the first time, soft, low, almost a prayer. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he didn't sound like a man who believed in safety. In that moment, she didn't care. For the first time in days, she wasn't alone. When she woke again, the stars filled the sky above them, countless, cold, and bright. The horse had stopped. The cowboy sat beside a small fire, its glow flickering against his face. He looked younger now, though his eyes were old, older than any storm. She tried to move her legs but felt nothing. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away, ashamed of her weakness. He noticed but didn't speak. Instead, he handed her a piece of bread and pointed toward the flames. His silence wasn't cruel. It was patient. And somehow that patience comforted her more than words ever could. She took the bread, ate slowly, and felt warmth returning to her chest. That night, as the fire crackled between them, she realized something strange. She didn't even know his name, and yet she trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. Somewhere beyond the dunes, her tribe rode farther away, forgetting her name, her voice, her face. But here, in the middle of nowhere, a silent cowboy had given her something they had not, a second chance. The stars burned brighter above, and the desert wind softened. For the first time since the raid, she closed her eyes not in fear, but in fragile peace. The night had fallen heavy over the Arizona desert, painting the sand in silver and shadow. The air was cool, carrying the faint cry of distant coyotes. The cowboy rode slowly, his arms steadying the frail body slumped before him. The girl's breaths were shallow, barely there, each one a struggle against the darkness closing in. He could feel her slipping, her head falling limply against his chest. Urgency sparked in his chest. When he spotted the outline of an abandoned cabin half buried in the dunes, he turned his horse toward it. The structure was old, worn by wind and time, but it offered shelter. He dismounted, carried her inside, and laid her on a bed of hay. Her skin was cold. Without wasting a second, he gathered sticks, struck a match, and built a small fire that glowed like a fragile heartbeat in the night. The cowboy knelt beside her, his face etched with quiet worry. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a small canteen, letting a few drops of water touch her cracked lips. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. He shook his head gently as she didn't need to. The firelight flickered against her dark eyes, reflecting fear and confusion. She had been left to die, abandoned by her own people, yet this stranger, this man of few words and many scars, had stopped for her. As warmth filled the cabin, she began to tremble, not from cold, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being cared for. He took off his worn leather coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled of smoke, dust, and something steady, something safe. She watched him silently, wondering what kind of man saves someone who can give nothing in return. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. But inside, the silence was thick with unspoken stories. The cowboy sat near the fire, his hat pulled low over his eyes, staring into the flames as if they held memories he couldn't forget. The girl drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with flashes of her father's face, her tribe's horses, the sound of war cries, and the cruel moment they turned their backs on her. When she woke, dawn was breaking, painting the desert in soft orange. The cowboy was gone for a while, but when he returned, he carried a rabbit and a handful of desert herbs. Without a word, he cooked over the fire, the smell filling the cabin with life again. Over the next days, he became her silent guardian. He moved with calm precision, hunting boiling water, gathering wild plants for healing. When she couldn't move, he fed her patiently. When fever took her, he cooled her with damp cloths. She began to study him in those quiet moments. The deep lines on his face, the faded scar near his temple, the sadness in his eyes that seemed older than he was. He rarely spoke, but his silence wasn't cold. It was the kind that came from someone who had once spoken too much and learned the world didn't listen. Slowly, her body began to recover strength, though her legs remained still, lifeless beneath the blanket. Yet her heart, long numb, began to feel again. One afternoon, as the sun sank behind the canyon, she watched him outside repairing a broken part of the cabin wall. His movements were strong but careful, almost tender. She wanted to ask who he was, what pain had carved that quiet into him. But when he came back inside, wiping sweat from his brow, her voice came out small. "Why did you save me?" The question hung between them, fragile as glass. For a moment he didn't move. Then he sat beside her, eyes fixed on the flames. "Because once," he said softly, "no one saved me." The words were simple, but they hit her harder than any cry. She realized then that he carried his own ghosts, people he couldn't save, choices that haunted him like the desert wind. That night, they sat by the fire without speaking. The flames danced between them, glowing gold against the walls. She studied him, his rough hands, his steady breathing, the quiet pain in his eyes, and realized that he wasn't just helping her. He was healing through her. When she smiled faintly, he noticed, and for the first time, a hint of warmth touched his lips. Outside, stars glittered across the vast sky, endless and cold. Inside that small, forgotten cabin, two lonely souls had found a fragile peace. She no longer felt like the dying daughter of a fallen chief. She felt human again, alive, seen, remembered. As days turned into a week, her spirit began to return. The cowboy built a stretcher from old wood and leather strips, using it to carry her outside so she could feel the sunlight. She breathed